Welcome to this explainer, breaking down a really fascinating intersection between international diplomacy and local tax law. We're diving right into a highly specific yet incredibly applicable Italian tax ruling, ruling number 9 of 2025, issued by the Italian Revenue Agency. If you're an independent professional, a consultant, or someone dreaming of working for an international organization, you absolutely need to pay close attention to the breakdown we're about to go through.
You know, there's this persistent, widespread assumption in the world of international relations and global consulting. It goes like this. If you work for the United Nations or one of its agencies, your income is entirely exempt from local taxes. It sounds like the ultimate professional dream, right? I mean, a prestigious role, a global mission, and on top of it all, a tax-free salary? But is that actually true across the board? Does the UN banner automatically shield your paycheck from your local tax authority? Well, that is the exact mystery we're unraveling today, looking at a very real, very recent legal interpretation.
Section 1. The Consultant's Case.
Now, the Agenzia delle Entrate, the Italian Revenue Agency, is the ultimate authority on taxation within Italy. This specific document we're looking at, ruling number 9 of 2025 from the Central Directorate for Large Taxpayers and International Affairs, was actually issued in response to a direct inquiry from a taxpayer. So we're not dealing in rumors or just generalized advice today. We're looking at the definitive, documented answer provided by the state to a very specific set of working conditions. So who exactly was this taxpayer? Well, the consultant in question is an Italian citizen residing in Italy. She was hired by UNICEF ECARO, which of course falls under the United Nations umbrella, and her exact title was consultant or individual contractor. Now, she wasn't relocated to New York or Geneva. She worked right in Italy at the Rome outpost that was established back in 2016. Her payment structure is absolutely vital here. She's paid per deliverable. When she finishes a piece of work, she submits an internal request to UNICEF and they pay her. Notably, UNICEF did not require her to open a partita IVA, which is the Italian equivalent of a VAT number to process those payments. Believing her UN-derived income was exempt from Italian taxes, she submitted a formal query just to double-check her status.
Section 2. The UN tax privilege.
The whole foundation of this tax-free myth is built on something very real called headquarters agreements, or in Italian, accordi di sede. By definition, these are international treaties that regulate the relationship between a host state, in this case, Italy, and an international entity operating within its borders. In the Italian legal system, Article 41 of Presidential Decree 601 from 1973 explicitly states that exemptions provided by international agreements continue to apply over ordinary tax laws. So these treaties deliberately limit the host country's sovereignty in some very specific ways, just to guarantee that the international organization can operate fully and independently.
The logic behind this law is actually brilliantly practical. Member states contribute vast amounts of funding to organizations like the UN. If a host country taxed the salaries of the UN staff working there, well, that host country would essentially be using its local tax system to claw back the financial contributions it just made to the international body. Makes sense, right? Tax immunity ensures the organization's funds go entirely toward its global mission, rather than just filling the local treasury of whichever country happens to host the office.
Section 3. Officials versus Consultants.
Let's briefly trace the legal history here. For UNICEF, which is part of the UN structure, the ultimate rulebook is the Convention on the Privileges and Immunities of the United Nations. That was approved by the UN General Assembly way back in 1946. Italy officially made this convention executive within its borders in 1957 through Law 1318. Later, that 1973 presidential decree reinforced that these international treaties supersede local tax laws. We're looking at nearly 80 years of entrenched international law governing modern freelance work today.
Now, according to Article 5 of that 1946 convention, tax exemptions on salaries are granted specifically and exclusively to officials of the United Nations. That's a highly specific category determined by the Secretary General. Consultants, however, do not share this status. The Revenue Agency drew a hard line here, basically saying the legal status of these two roles is entirely different. And to prove this, the Revenue Agency didn't just point to abstract law. They looked directly at the consultant's own paperwork. Annex 3 of the General Terms and Conditions of her UNICEF contract explicitly states this in black and white. It says, the consultant is not a staff member nor an official. Boom. By signing the contract, the consultant agreed to a status that definitively locked her out of the subjective requirement needed to claim that international tax exemption. The myth of blanket UN immunity? Officially busted for independent contractors.
Section 4. The Tax Verdict.
To reinforce the objectivity of this ruling, we can look at the technical breakdown provided by F.D.T Consulting. They're an independent firm that analyzed ruling number 9, and their summary report perfectly mirrors the agency's logic. They outline the case of the Italian resident consulting for UNICEF and confirm the rigid boundary of the UN tax exemption. Their technical analysis agrees completely. The exemption is reserved strictly for officials, no exceptions.
So here's the crucial reality check. Because our protagonist is categorized as a consultant and not an official, she lacks what the agency calls the essential subjective requirement. Because of this, that protective shield of the 1946 UN Convention drops entirely. The Italian state reasserts its taxing authority, meaning every single euro she earns from UNICEF is subject to ordinary taxation in Italy. Fiscally speaking, she's treated exactly like any other autonomous worker in the country.
Section 5. The VAT number obligation. Let's see how this plays out practically. Remember, the consultant asked if she needed to open a VAT number, a partita IVA, even though UNICEF didn't ask her for one. Well, the agency pointed straight to Article 5 of Presidential Decree 633 from 1972, which defines who is actually subject to value-added tax. It outlines 3 really clear triggers. If you exercise an economic or professional activity, and you do it habitually and you do it continuously, even if it's not your exclusive job, you are legally mandated to open a VAT number. The law defines the exercise of arts and professions strictly by the habitual nature of the autonomous work.
This highlights a critical disconnect that so many international freelancers face. UNICEF's internal payment system, which relies on deliverables rather than formal commercial invoices, is just an administrative process of an international body. But here's the catch. That internal process does not override Italian domestic law. The revenue agency made it abundantly clear. Whether the UN wants an invoice or not is literally irrelevant to the Italian state. If you are a resident in Italy doing habitual, continuous consulting work, domestic law compels you to open a VAT number. End of story.
All right, let's synthesize everything we've learned into our final takeaways. First, if you're consulting for an international organization like the UN, do not assume you have tax immunity. You are almost certainly treated as an ordinary autonomous worker by your local tax authority. Second, that historical, treaty-based tax shield, it requires you to officially hold the title of official or staff member. And third, the administrative procedures of your international client do not shield you from the administrative requirements of your home country. If you work continuously, you've got to comply with local business registration laws, like opening a VAT number in Italy.
Which leaves us with one final, absolutely crucial thought for anyone currently navigating or aiming for the international job market. Don't rely on assumptions, and definitely don't rely on the prestige of the logo on your employer's letterhead. Look closely at the fine print. What exact title is written on your international contract? Because the difference between the word official and the word consultant isn't just semantics. As we've seen today, it's the difference between full tax immunity and bearing the standard fiscal responsibilities of an ordinary citizen. Thank you for joining me for this analysis. Make sure you review your agreements, consult your local tax professionals, and keep learning. See you next time.